Welcome back to the second episode of Living Fully with Diabetes, a podcast series made in association with Abbott. I'm Deepthi Ahuja, your host for this podcast, and I also head content for HT Smartcast, the podcast arm of Hindustan Times. In this episode, we will talk about how people can make management of diabetes simpler, easier by monitoring it properly. We know how tricky it can be for people as they navigate their unique, complex diabetes journeys. It can be a challenge to manage one's health, especially if one is spending a good amount of time just worrying about it on a daily basis. But thankfully, there are ways in which people have managed to live with diabetes fully to the hilt. To talk more about this, we have two very special guests on this episode. The first guest is Dr. Jyotidev Keshavadev. He is the founder, CEO, and chairman of Jyotidev's Diabetes Research Center in Kerala. He's an active member of key diabetes industry bodies. He's also been a part of several national and international presentations and publications. Our second guest on this episode is Dr. Prashant Subramaniam. He's the head of Medical Affairs, South Asia, Korea, Taiwan, Diabetes Care, Abbott. Thank you both for joining us today. Let's get right into it. I hope I am correct in assuming that there will be a lot of potential obstacles for people living with diabetes. These challenges could be in the form of traveling, New Year festivities, family gatherings. This means that there will be an abundance of sweet and savory foods and disrupted routines. So, do you expect diabetes management to be impacted significantly? And also, what can people do to keep that at bay without missing out on any of the fun?
If you asked me the same question 10 years ago,
Hmm.
I probably could have been very worried. But now I'm not worried because there are many new tools to manage diabetes. And now we know more about diabetes because so many innovations have happened during the past 10 years, both in terms of medications, in terms of technologies, in terms of mobile health applications. So we, the doctors, and also the patients are now at a much more comfortable level. And you said in the beginning that it's going to be a challenge. The
Hmm.
festivals are going to be a challenge. And I would like to correct it. The festivals are not going to be a challenge. We will definitely celebrate the festivals. But we need to be prepared because we should never forget the fact that we are having diabetes.
Hmm.
When we are preparing for the travel or for the holidays, make sure that the medications are kept. Make sure that you have sufficient supplies for the glucose meter strips, for the continuous glucose monitoring devices. Make sure that you are storing them at the optimal temperature. And when you are approaching a festival, I always tell my patients, please consult me at least a week before you start your travel or your vacation, because that's very important, because all the advices will depend upon the current parameters, the laboratory parameters, the physical parameters, so that Dr. Prashant as a doctor and me as a doctor, we can give advice to our patients. And very important, that diabetes is a dynamic disease. It keeps on changing.
Hmm.
And the success mantra in diabetes is monitoring. And monitoring makes the difference in diabetes. So what do you mean by monitoring? When you're traveling, never forget monitoring the glucose. When you're traveling, never forget the advices on how frequently you should be monitoring the glucose.
Hmm.
And you cannot be very strict and stringent when you're on a vacation. I cannot tell my patient, don't eat this, don't eat this. So that advice should be more flexible
Hmm.
because it is Christmas time and there'll be a lot of cakes around. And I cannot compel them and there could be disruption. And I, as a doctor, should be prepared for that. And I should be giving advices to the patients, and the patients can have those advices translated to in the form of carb counting, or how much more insulin they should be administering, or how frequently they should be monitoring the glucose. And if they are lucky enough to have a continuous glucose monitoring device, I would say that they will be probably more flexible in their lifestyles.
Hmm.
They will have the knowledge on when to have a sugar and when to have a candy, when to have a cake, and how much quantity they can consume. But the advice that I would like to give is Very important diabetes. Equally important to medications and the advices that I have given on medications and very important advice in diabetes. 50% of our attention should be on medications, diet.
Hmm.
However, remember, physical activity and sleep, they are very, very important.
Hmm.
May not have the same time during a vacation for an exercise, but still, every day, somehow you have to find out time for a physical activity.
Hmm.
And if you are used to physical activity for 1 hour daily, during the vacation, you may get only 30 minutes. That is fine. That is fine. And sleep is very important.
Hmm.
In 6 to 8 hours. Below 6 hours, of course, not advisable. And above 8 hours also is not advisable. And that is quite interesting. So you have to be sleeping somewhere between 6 and 8 hours. And if you are eating comfortably, if you are sleeping comfortably, if you are having the physical activity as advised, then control of glucose, of course, it happens along with this.
Hmm.
And my advice will be have the festivals, have the vacations, and don't worry about diabetes. Don't worry about diabetes in not celebrating, but you should never forget the fact that diabetes is a silent killer.
Hmm.
There won't be any symptoms at all, even if the glucose is very high. So you need to be very cautious in choosing your food. Eat more frequently small meals. Don't skip your meal. Skipping a main meal can be very, very dangerous in
Right.
terms of many other complications. However, make sure that you are eating every meal and don't skip the snacks as well. And choose your snacks so that there is less of carb, there is less of fat, and it doesn't interfere with your cardiovascular health.
Right.
Enjoy the celebrations.
Thank you so much for sharing these helpful tips, Dr. Jyotidev. Now, while this is an year end trend, are there any broader diabetes trends that you have seen that we should keep an eye on?
uh, I think what usually happens is people forget the fact that they are having diabetes.
Hmm.
Because diabetes is not an acute illness, diabetes is a lifelong illness. So you cannot forget your diabetes uh, when you're traveling or when you're in your work. You cannot just forget the diabetes. Because if you're having a dengue fever or if you're having a COVID, you will have symptoms. You will have body pains, you will have fever, and you will consult a doctor. But in diabetes, for as many as 6 or 8 years, there won't be any symptoms at all.
Hmm.
Year long, I will say that the success mantra in diabetes depends on monitoring. So when I say monitoring, it can be monitoring for glucose, it can be monitoring the body weight, because you have to maintain the ideal body weight. You have to
Hmm.
monitor the blood pressure, you have to monitor the sleep if possible. So you have to monitor multiple parameters, including the food. However, the most important is continuously monitoring the glucose, which is so dynamic because it
Right.
is so even subtle differences in the glucose. Let me tell you something which is very important, which is very interesting as well. Even in the absence of diabetes, you don't have diabetes, but still, if you have an illness, the glucose can be high.
Hmm.
So, low and high glucose, even in the absence of diabetes, it increases the chances of complications. So that is the importance of glucose as the fifth vital parameter. So equally important as pulse or blood pressure is glucose. But the difference is glucose keeps on changing. Whereas other parameters, we can just go to the doctor's office, measure, get a prescription, get back. But here, as a patient, you have to keep on monitoring. So year long, you have to keep on monitoring, get in touch with your healthcare team, and then with their solutions, you have to have those monitored values translate into changes in the prescriptions, changes in the behavior. So the most important change which has happened during the last 5 years is the parameters you are monitoring, especially the glucose which is monitoring, you can smartly translate to changes in the prescriptions and behavior. And when I say behavior, You have to change the behavior.
Yes,
You have to change the behavior. That doctor cannot.
of
So from
course.
the glucose, which is monitored, and from the trends and from the values, you, as I don't say you are a patient, you are a person who is bravely and smart enough to live with diabetes. So you should have the brilliance to modify your behaviors based on the glucose trends. And that
Lovely.
will bring down the cost, and that will bring down the complications. The ultimate aim of modern science is to prolong the lifespan of people with diabetes. And at the same time, when you're 80 years or 90 years, because I'm not joking, with diabetes, we can live up to 100 years now
Hmm.
with newer technologies, and you can celebrate your old age. So the ulterior objective is to enhance the quality of life, maintain the quality of life, even when you're old with diabetes.
Makes perfect sense, Dr. Jyotidev. Now, Dr. Prashant, since we've spoken about monitoring and we've spoken about technology, and we've seen that technology has been a game changer across industries with examples across the spectrum. We've had 3D printing, robotics, augmented reality. According to you, what role does technology play in diabetes space?
Thanks, Deepti. Interesting question. So I was busy listening to what Dr. Jyoti Dev had mentioned. He entirely, put it into summary what it means to be empowered living with diabetes. And now coming on to the technology which helps make this possible. There's been huge advances in technology across sectors, and healthcare is no exception. For now, everybody uses a smartphone and has easy access to the internet. And this has actually made diabetes management a lot more easier now compared to before. Um, the case in point would be continuous glucose monitoring within diabetes management.
Right.
Here, all we need is a sensor attached to the back of the arm, and with the help of a smartphone app, we're now able to measure glucose values continuously. And that means the sensor is able to record a value every minute, essentially build a trend across the day, and let you know how the glucose values are changing vis-a-vis all the activities, the food, the diet choices, therapies, whatnot. And this empowers the person with diabetes and the doctor managing this patient to effectively manage the condition better. And like Dr. Jyoti Dev alluded to, it's a lot to do with continuously monitoring parameters. And here, a point estimate or a value that you get from a glucometer is just a single value. And we
Hmm.
have to enter into a hassle of, swap the finger, then prick using a lancet, then wait for a droplet of blood loaded onto the strip, get a value, and then decide what would happen given that I would have some change now. Am I going to consume food? Do I need more insulin? All this will decide what happens to the next glucose value.
Hmm.
To bring a lot of the mystery out of these decisions in daily life, a continuous glucose monitoring device helps because it records a value every minute and you have ready trends to
Hmm.
look at, and you know how the previous day has been, what did I consume that made it go up, and it also helps us manage glucose better. There are guidelines which talk about the target range, what we call as time in range. This is between 70 milligrams per deciliter, the lower limit, and 180 milligrams per deciliter. I mean, this is decided by the treating doctor. And as
Hmm.
long as we adhere to this, as long as we manage a lifestyle, our choices, live our daily lives within these two limits, I'm sure that our diabetes would be under really good control, and we are effectively moving more towards better quality of life, like Dr. Jyotidev spoke about, the longevity. And all of us essentially want to live longer, live happy, live
Yes.
healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. In December, everyone goes, they travel either on a holiday or they're attending parties, New Year parties, Christmas parties. Is there any way technology can help you stay connected to your diabetes management?
The travel has been transformed by technology. And case in point would be that none of us now travels with printed documents, flight tickets, train tickets, whichever. Nor do we show our hotel bookings with the printout, but on the app, on the email, for example. and we make payments using the smartphone, don't we? So this, it's almost the easier way to manage any condition, be it diabetes in this case. So all you need is a continuous glucose monitoring device, the sensor being on your arm, and then using a smartphone app, it's so easy to get a value of where the glucose values are headed, build a trend, and then this empowers people with diabetes
Hmm.
to manage their condition better. And it's during the holiday season, there may be ups and downs because of the erratic lifestyle to diet, to travel. But all this can be simplified or made much more simpler now that we know what's happening, and we can actually take steps to prevent the highs and the lows. And this goes a long way in ensuring that we do enjoy the season, but don't
Hmm.
overdo. I mean, things we shouldn't. And then it's easier to come back from a holiday feeling fully refreshed instead of coming back with a lot of worry.
Lovely. Um, Dr. Prashant, it truly seems that technology has the potential to transform people's lives, people's healths. Now, as we wrap this episode and also the year, Dr. Jyoti Dev, what resolutions do you think are specially relevant for people who want to live fully with diabetes?
I think the best New Year resolution will be to use a smartphone for managing diabetes.
Yeah.
And because I am echoing what Dr. Prasad said a while ago, and I am a fan of glucose sensors. And I have a glucose sensor over here, and
Hmm.
it is hidden over there. And I can use my smartphone. And with the smartphone, I can scan,
Hmm.
and it will give you the glucose levels. So I
Hmm.
have the glucose levels over there. This smartphone motivates me to exercise, and these sensor values, I am getting the sensor values continuously. I'm getting the sensor values, so I am getting the patterns, and I'm sharing this with more than 10 of my friends, and I can share with up to 20 friends. So if you can have a new year resolution that I am going to have a smartphone for monitoring my glucose, I am going to have a smartphone for monitoring my physical activity, I am going to have a mobile health application like this for managing my lifestyle illnesses. Or if you don't have, there are situations where this podcast is being listened by somebody who doesn't have diabetes, but a family member will be having diabetes.
Right.
You look at the Indian data, now the recommendation is to screen everyone from the age of 25 years onwards for diabetes because the age of screening has come down. And now we have more than 100 million people with diabetes in India
Yeah.
and around 136 million with pre-diabetes, and half of them doesn't know that they have diabetes. So
Right.
that is a scenario where monitoring is going to make a difference, and the smartphones are used by almost everyone. So whether you have diabetes or not, I will request all of you to use a smartphone
Yeah.
for managing your lifestyle. You are managing your lifestyle illnesses to maintain the ideal body weight, and if possible, to continuously monitor your glucose levels. And that is the way to success. If you are so determined to bring down the cost of care in diabetes, if you are so determined to avoid all the deadly complications of diabetes, we are living in an era where it is possible to prevent the deadly complications. 10 years ago, it was not possible, but now it is possible. And this is possible only if you are integrating, embracing the modern technologies of monitoring along with your management of diabetes. And I wish you all success. And I wish the new year the very best for all of you. And the only advice is celebrate your diabetes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jyoti Dev and Dr. Prashant, for your valuable time. Let's hope that this new year brings new hope, technology, news, and care for diabetes management. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.